And thanks to all you guys for being here. It's really nice when you do a bit of traveling to a foreign place to see kind of a full room. And I hear it's also exam time, so that you've made time for this in the midst of much good bit of competing priorities. I really appreciate. So thank you for that too. So this afternoon I get a chance to share with you some of my current thinking. And we good here, Danielle? Yeah? Cool. So as you guys saw in whatever went around beforehand, so I'm going to share with you some of my current thinking on how we can all be a part of kind of changing the rules of the game. And I was very intentional with some of the wording I passed on to Diane. This idea of changing the rules as if we intend on staying here. And I really want to emphasize a few points before we get started. The first of which is that I will not be sharing answers with you today. These two folks have influenced my thinking on questions and answered. The first is a web comic I really like. I'm sure these slides will go out afterwards, and so if you wanted to check it out, I encourage you to. And Rilke has got one of my favorite quotes around encouraging us all to live the questions, and that as we do that, we kind of find ourselves towards the answers. And so I've been encouraged by John and others to make sure I keep my remarks kind of brief and make sure we have a really good chance for question and answers afterwards. I don't have many of those answers, but I think my hope is, at the very least, I'll provoke some interesting questions for both you, myself, and everyone here. Certainly would like to encourage you to kind of take what you'd like of what you hear from me and leave the rest. That's totally fine. Second, by way of introduction, I come to you with privilege. Some aspects of that. I am male, I am white, I am middle class, straight, Canadian, European descent. And so I just wanted to share with you that I'm aware of that and kind of how that perspective, how that influences the perspective I'm bringing to you here too. And then third, and maybe last, for kind of a bit of an introduction, I thought I'd share with you my mantra. I'm not sure if any of you guys have mantras as well. This is something I kind of say to myself on a regular basis to remind me of kind of my core sense of self. I thought that might help give you a sense of who I am before I start getting into some of my thoughts and reflections on the movement. So my mantra is this. It's that I'm living at a time of unprecedented crises, part of a cultural narrative unwilling to admit interdependence with all living things. As a result, I'm part of a species that is complicit in a fairly recent assault on a delicate yet resilient biosphere. Though, I am also part of the revolution. I am building a movement. I am living life fully. I am a spark. I am a lover. I am a leader. I'm an inspirer and a brother. And I am always doing my best, choosing to derive a sacred meaning from my experience, and deservedly grateful beyond words for all of it. And so I've been told by John, let's not go into the myriad crises. You guys have a good sense of all this already. So I'm not going to talk about the climate crisis, inequality, financial, race, human health, biodiversity. I think we can all agree, from the micro to the macro scale, we're in some pretty severe turmoil as a species and as a planet. And if you want to talk about the specifics, hey, questions, we can address that afterwards. So today, what I've been asked to talk about is my reflections on what is needed in the transformational change to move us through this. And so my current thinking is focused on two major paradigm shifts. The first is a shift in our own reawakening as individuals. And the second is then a reconnection back to nature. And with that, a codependence on other living things. So let's start with the sense of reawakening. These three individuals, I think, set this up really nicely and say it way better than I ever could. So I'm going to share with you some of these folks. The first is David Foster Wallace. Who has seen David Foster Wallace's 2005 commencement address at Kenyon? A few of you. For those of you that haven't, I so strongly encourage you, probably one of the best 20 minutes you'll spend in your life. In it, he shares this. He says, And I submit to you that this is what the real no bullshit value of your liberal arts education is supposed to be about. How to keep from going through your comfortable, prosperous, respectable adult life, dead, unconscious, a slave to your head and to your natural default setting of being uniquely, completely, imperially alone day in and day out. And what I think David's really getting at is this sense of awakening from a dullness, and a dullness that in our current society can be tough to kind of rise above. Beyond that, this quote is one I share often whenever I'm speaking to someone who is in the midst of some life reshaping of finding their passion. And this is Howard Thurman, who says, don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive. Because what the world needs is more people who've come alive. That is beautiful in its simplicity, and I could not agree more. And so there's this mix of awakening from the dullness, getting a sense of what it really is that makes you come alive. And the third layer is actually doing something about it. And so I've chosen a quote from Brene Brown here. And Brene is a leading author, therapist, thinker. And she says that, and this is from The Gifts of Imperfection, to become fully human means learning to turn my gratitude for being alive into some concrete, common good. And my sense is if as a species, if as individuals, we were able to shift our own internal sense of being alive, to wake from this dullness, to find what it is that makes each of us come alive or find our passion, and then actually do something about it, that mix, I think in turn will lead us each to become more compassionate, more empathetic, more connected to ourselves and who we are, and in turn connected to one another. And so I'll share with you a bit about my own kind of journey in reawakening. So I'm a Laurier grad from Waterloo, Ontario, or at least live there now, and from Montreal originally. I did this double degree. It's a long name, Computing and Computer Electronics and Business Administration. What it means is I built robots and wrote business plans. Those are my two things. My path, I worked at a lot of high-tech companies in my different internships while at university. And my path really, the sense was work at a high-tech marketing company, make lots of money, do quite well for myself. That was the original intention of my undergraduate experience. Not particularly enlightened. And it wasn't until it was in third year or so that I picked up Ishmael. Has anybody read Ishmael before, by show of hands? Yeah, right. Many of you have. That's far more than typical folks I speak to. So for me, this book, I only picked it up. An old neighbor of mine from Montreal when I was growing up had mailed it to me in high school. And the cover looks kind of hippy-dippy. And it's got a quote you can't read that's fairly pretentious. And so I didn't pick it up for years. And it was probably, third year undergrad, where I was feeling a bit nostalgic for my Montreal days and guilty that my friend had put this effort in and I hadn't even read the book he'd sent me. And for me, this helped me start asking questions of our culture and our worldview and my worldview, and started to shift my values in a pretty significant way, and started to help me get a better sense of some of the laws of nature that in the recent past as a species we've decided to disregard. And started to help me ask some questions. And that led me towards a number of different people on campus, outside of campus, authors. I think you guys are quite lucky to have Bill, an asset to this campus. Deep Economy for me was really like a seminal, important influencer on some of my thinking. And then led me to some pretty dark spots too. I'm not sure if anybody's read Endgame by Derek Jensen. But for me, that I can remember one afternoon, I was in a parking lot in Toronto waiting for my then girlfriend to pick me up to go for dinner, I think. And she was running a bit late. And so I had more time than I'd expected to be reading Endgame. And just felt morally kind of bankrupt. Like there's just this sense of, wow, this culture has this history that I didn't fully understand, I still don't fully understand. But as I was coming to understand, I didn't have the tools to really deal with how my participation in that kind of fits in. So I'm not to say that this process of coming alive is going to be easy for any one person, but I do think it's easier for students, and particularly for young people in general, and for a few reasons. One of those reasons is because you've made fewer decisions based on your values so far. What I mean by that is when I speak to people of my parents' generation, well, they've chosen homes, spouses, careers, lifestyles around particular values of theirs. To have a values-based conversation with someone of my parents' generation gets at the core of what it is for them that is around their whole life. And as students, few of you have done that yet. Show of hands, who's bought a house so far? Right? Okay, thanks guys. The faculty. But of the students among you, you haven't made those choices yet. And so to shift those values while challenging, and there's a process to it, and there's I don't want to diminish that, is easier than for those who've made those decisions already. Secondly, you've also got the most to lose. And my sense is you have the strongest resolve. And so my sense is if you look at any social movement, you'll see the young people on the front lines of it. One example, the Freedom Rides. When you look at the 50s and 60s black human rights movement, the Freedom Rides, my sense is, was a fairly influential campaign that helped lead to significant legislative change in just a couple of years. Now, what happened here? You had the first two bus loads were organized by a national organization of a mix of black and white people that hopped on a bus and said, we're going to go to the southern states and ride against Jim Crow laws. Things did not go well at all for those first two bus loads. When they arrived at some of the cities in the southern states, this is what happened to one of the two buses. People on those buses had to be literally escorted out of town to get medical care. And just these first two rides started to influence a bit of a conversation that this was happening in the States at the time. But I don't think too many people expected what happened next. And that was literally busloads of students from colleges and universities across your country followed the same thing and said, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we're going to hop on these buses. This is a good thing here. And they went all in. And my sense is the young people that were part of the Freedom Rides were massively influential to the major legislative changes that occurred later that decade. So there's some thinking for you and some questions for you around kind of reawakening. So let's shift, secondly, to then this idea of codependence with nature. And I think it's odd that we've been able to remove ourselves from this sense of codependence, that we've removed ourselves from these natural laws of nature. And I'm still figuring it out, and I think I've got a lot to learn. But let's take a quick step back as it relates to the economy. This is a kind of a paradigm-shifting visual that gives you a sense of, wait a second, the economy is a system that's meant to serve us. It's designed by society to simplify the exchange of goods and services. And as a society, we live on this planet. And we are kind of ruled by the natures and forces of the planet. It's been said that you can see the economy as a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment. My sense is if you look at the media, the general media story doesn't follow that line. I think you'll see a lot of the other way around, right? It's a lot of what do we need to do to keep the economy doing a good thing, as if it's separated or in some way that we are responsible for it. So this is a pretty big reshifting or reconceptualizing of the economy to meet human needs in a way that meets those needs of the planet. And so I'm also a very firm believer in a term I heard a few years ago, this idea of relentless incrementalism. That if you're going to have conversations about paradigm-shifting norms, well, if we're going to talk about solutions that get us there, I'm a firm believer in relentless incrementalism towards transformational change. And this is where I can tell you some more of my own story of being a part of some relentless incrementalism. And so when I pick up from that parking lot kind of low point, I was still in the last years of my undergrad at that stage, and I had found a prof who was willing to work with me and give me course credit outside of the classroom to start looking at these kinds of questions and looking at carbon pricing and taking my business language and applying it to this evolving environmental sense of place. And through that, that, outside of the classroom, it wasn't even a standard course. I had my standard business courses, and Barry Colbert and I then met in his office and outside the classroom began to really put together some thoughts and then convinced the dean to allow us to write a business plan. And that business plan became Sustainable Waterloo Region. And the premise was fairly simple, I think. It's that, well, let's get businesses engaged. Let's have them learn from each other. They'll plug into a network to get access to supports, and they'll actually set goals to reduce their impact. And this new not-for-profit will report back on the progress they make. And so this is in mid-2008. I was just in my last semester of undergrad. This was our first meeting here. Me and a handful of friends. Jody in the front at the time was living in my backyard. If there's questions about that, we can talk about that after too. One of my profs is in here. This is a photo of me pitching to a funder at the time back in 2008. So literally, I remember there was one pitch that was right before midterm. So that was kind of my shifting life at the time. The idea we were proposing was this regional carbon initiative I just described to you, where businesses would learn from each other and set targets. And if you were a business in Waterloo Region, this is what we would do to help you. We would give you access to software to track your carbon impact. We'd invite you to events to learn from each other and consultants and best practices for reducing your impact. We'd give you all kinds of support. So connect you with consultants and toolkits and best practice guides from other businesses. And then we'd recognize you for the progress you make towards reducing your impact. And the team would then, as you're getting these different supports, is walking you through everything from getting an inventory of your current carbon impact to creating an action plan, to then eventually setting a target. And as a social enterprise, these businesses would pay fees to participate. So between $500 to about $5,000 a year per business would be part of their services they would receive, and these would then be the fees that they would pay. So fast forward about 11 months in the midst of the economic recession back in 2008, and this group of recent grads and students put together just over $200,000 of initial funding. That came from a mix of grantors, business plan competitions, and corporate founding partners. And in that picture is actually Barry Colbert, that same prof. Wilfrid Laurier was one of the first funders back in 2008. And to be fair, this is a longer story that we don't have time to get into right now. And if you'd like to hear more of it, I did a TED Talk really just focused on this, this whole story. And you can check that out online if you'd like. What I'm going to do today is just fast forward to the results. And so here's what happened over the course of 5 years. In 2009, that program launched with 3 businesses in Waterloo Region. By the end of 2013, these 2 slides are the 21 businesses that have set targets to reduce their carbon between 20 to 100% over the next 10 years from every sector of the economy in Waterloo Region. And these organizations are those that have made public intention that they are working towards setting a target, and they're part of the Regional Carbon Initiative in Waterloo Region. Their results get shared at an event every year. This report gets published, and I brought a few copies with me. So if you want to take a look, you can pass it around. In that report, the progress the companies are making is shared. It gets released at an event where almost 500 people show up to get a sense of what these businesses have done over the past year. And so what has that all resulted in? Well, all told, yes, it's 68 businesses total. Those 68 businesses employ 14% of the workforce in Waterloo Region. Those organizations collectively have set targets to reduce their carbon impact by 53,000 tons, and that's the equivalent of taking 12,000 cars off the road every year. The businesses can count on it existing for the foreseeable future because based on those membership fees, the program is now financially breaking even. And so a few reflections on some of what's happened beyond the numbers. So first of all, what they've done is they've essentially created a marketplace. Now you have businesses who are setting goals. They need to follow through on those. They then need to work with other local practitioners to complete energy audits and to install HVAC and solar and all the rest. So first of all, you've provided new incentive to get this marketplace in place. Secondly, they've actually started to shift industry norms. So on those slides, I went through them really quickly. 7 of the 10 biggest insurance companies in Waterloo Region are now part of the Regional Carbon Initiative. What that now means is when this same slide deck gets presented to a Rotary Club or business group in that community, the question that gets asked is, where are the other big 3? And so I like to say that now insurance companies are actually conspicuous by their absence. And so in less, like 5 years, the norm has shifted that if you're in the insurance business in Waterloo Region, you are setting targets to reduce your carbon impact. That's part of the status quo. And that's this sense of incrementalism to get towards a more meaningful shift. The other reflection on kind of why this happened and how it happens is the business case being central to the conversation. What I mean by that is that when I would speak to a business, when I was part of the organization, when I would speak to a business, my first conversation was about how this will benefit them. And I spoke to them in their language and spoke with them in their language. That is, how will this save you money? How will it help you to attract a generation that looks and talks like me? How will it help you to improve your brand in a meaningful, credible way? How will this help you avoid risk, whether it's government policy, regulatory risk, or supply chain risk from Target and Walmart and others of that kind? And then, once a business would see, and to the extent that they did see that there was a case for them, would then talk about, here's the value proposition of these services to support you. Now, when the business would join initially, they might join simply to say, this is going to save me money within the first year. And I'd say, great, you're welcome here. And I would also hope, and we saw some of this play through in the surveys year after year, that that same business who joined to say, I'm going to save some money and get a payback on projects of a year or less and learn from this sustainability thing, would then over time start to learn from their peers and then respond to that same survey and say, this is actually creating a meaningful competitive advantage for my business. We're now looking at projects of 4, 5, 6, 7 years. And then further still, we'd see their values starting to shift over years too. And they'd be talking about the culture of their organizations shifting that both made them more profitable as a result, more progressive companies that maximize profit and also were taking on much larger projects looking at reducing their impact. And that kind of values-based change is part of what really excites me about what's happened in Waterloo Region. I'm going to do another quick fast track on this point of relentless incrementalism to talk about what happened next. And so this is the guy in the top left corner of this slide. His name is Evan DeValentino. He was a prof at Niagara College. And Evan was the first person who came to me back in 2010 and asked me if I'd share the business plan for sustainable Waterloo Region with him. And I said, sure. And then someone else from Hamilton and really across the province in the States, North Carolina was the first to ask. Out on the West Coast, I was joking with John, someone from the Ukraine was the first time I had to translate to share the model. And very quickly started to realize, this is me at their launch event for the Niagara-based group. They launched within a year of some of the ad hoc Sunday afternoon coaching, and realized really quickly this doesn't make sense to, at the time I was still leading this fledgling startup, not-for-profit, and I was in Niagara, 2 hours down the road. And groups like Ashoka also came and said, hey, have you thought about the idea that this could scale? And so it took us about 2 years to figure out the approach that Sustainability Collab would take. And it's this, that we would take the core 4 approaches of what's happened in Waterloo Region. Specifically, that businesses are working with a local organization. That organization's audience is those businesses and not residents. That they're operating as a social enterprise. So they're charging fees of some kind to the businesses that participate in their community. And that those organizations are actually setting targets as part of the program. That it's not just awareness and logos, but that by being a part of it, the minimum expectation is that they're going to work towards setting goals. And we were in the lucky position when we did end up launching to be able to select from the applications that came in 5 communities across Ontario that are now part of this network. Right up from the eastern part of the province, Ottawa, down to the far southwestern side, and that's the Niagara Sustainability Initiative. And so the important reflection, I think, for me in this is this sense of, well, what's the vision for what this network could accomplish? And so what if you had 10 communities in one province, and in each community, up to 20% of their workforce was working with the businesses there to set targets to reduce their carbon impact? If that was happening, how does that start to change the conversation on things like a carbon price? How does that change the conversation about the sustainability challenge more broadly? My hope is that in fairly significant ways that might start to bear true. And that's really some of the questions I'm starting to answer over the next several years. And so maybe to finish off, I'll come back to this idea of changing the rules of the game. And so this is a sense of where I've been at in terms of incrementally working towards changing these rules. But what are some examples of what that actually looks like? And I'll share with you just three of some of the things I've been inspired by that, for me, kind of fit that definition of major paradigm shifts that would help us look at the economy in ways that I'd suggested earlier. The first has to do with ecosystem services. And so, simply put, ecosystem service is any part of nature that is doing some value for our global community. A simple example is trees. So a tree takes oxygen or takes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and pumps oxygen back in. Thank you. That's wonderful. Bees that pollinate flowers for us. Wonderful. And so there's a study that was done in 1997. Robert Costanza did the study. And he looked at, okay, what is the value of our global GDP at the time? And then also, what is then the value of all these ecosystem services? Interesting, right? He found the value of global GDP is simple. It was 17 trillion at the time. The value of these ecosystem services, at minimum, was 33 trillion. And in economic circles, ecosystem services are what's called off-balance sheet accounting. Another way to say the soft stuff that doesn't really matter. Well, if that much value is soft stuff, maybe we're going to make some decisions that might not be in our best interest if we're not adequately pricing. Now, one of the interesting questions here starts to come up, well, what does it mean to price nature? And how does that shift our connection to nature if we're going to put a dollar amount on what a tree is worth? So, not that there's not interesting questions to be answered here, but that if we were to look at things like this, and this is where carbon pricing to me starts to fit in, this might help us rethink the economy to be operating in a way that might serve us all better. Another example, one of my favorite books is The Lorax. I meant no harm. I most truly did not, but I had to grow bigger, and so bigger I got. Well, my sense is we can have a pretty rational conversation that to have unending, limitless growth on a finite resource base might not be in our best interest and might not have been the original intention of what a capitalist structure was meant to really be. And so there's this emerging field now of steady-state economics that I think merits a lot of attention to rethink what our global economy might look like. The third and last I'll share with you comes from the University of Waterloo, back where I'm from. And they've started a conversation about what they're calling the Canadian Index of Well-Being. And what they've done is taken 8 various factors, and for each of those, put indicators, in fact 8 for each. And this composite index they've started to measure. And you'll see on the chart on the right, they've now started to publish reports going back to 1994 to compare against, to say, okay, here's the progress we're making on GDP that everyone hears about, and here's the progress we're making on this index of well-being. And it's interesting. It's actually Robert Kennedy who has some great thinking on this from back in the 70s, and only now is some of this actually starting to take shape. And maybe no surprise that the number that everybody talks about, GDP, we're doing exceedingly well in, 28% growth since 1994. But in our well-being, kind of marginal growth. And more interestingly, in some areas in Canada, an environment is an example of this, we've actually gotten worse. And so my sense is if we actually started to think about well-being as an indicator that mattered, as a measure of progress of our society, that might help us, again, if we track against that which matters, we might start making progress in those areas. And my sense is this is some pretty cool work to start to look at that. So I've gone just barely a bit over. I do want to start getting into some good questions from you guys. So I'll end off where we started with Mr. Rilke here asking us to live the questions. And so if you guys have any, I'd be glad to have a conversation.
Thanks so much for your talk. I really liked it. I'd be interested for you to talk more about ecosystem services and how you think that incorporating them into the existing economy that we have will play out, because I mean, I think that you're obviously aware of a lot of the concerns with valuing ecosystem services, but kind of the way that I would see it is, or see a concern, is that ecosystem services could become just one sector or one small aspect of the economy, and it would kind of flip that model that you showed us at the beginning with the environment being the big green circle, and say actually the environment is only one slice of a pie of the red circle that's the economy.
Yeah. Well, as you might expect, my answer is I don't know. I think it's actually something that is worth each of you doing some reflecting on how that could work. One sense I can give you is that it's not something that happens overnight, first of all. So I go back to this idea of this incremental movement towards something like that. The other, I'm really big on process. And my sense is if we're going to start moving towards meaningful systems change, the process of how we do that is going to be just as important as what we're actually going to come out with. So an example, in Waterloo region, when we started this regional carbon initiative, we had to create rules of the game around how businesses would set goals to reduce their carbon impact. Rules that didn't exist before. So how ambitious are the goals going to be? What about carbon offsets? What year are they going to compare against? And so we could have just said, here's the answer, businesses, who wants to play? Instead, we said, here's some research on how this could work. Why don't you come out to some sessions and you vote on how this will work? It took us 6 months, took way more time. 25 people volunteered to be part of the process. Within 2 years, of those 25 organizations that were a part of it, 20 of them were among the first participants of the Regional Carbon Initiative, the first ones to be looking to set goals. And my sense is that they did that because they felt like they were a part of it, and they felt like they were a part of it because they actually were. We gave them control. And so if you're going to talk about major changes of this kind outside of a philosophical way, I don't have the answer on how we will get there, but I can say that my sense or my opinion is that the process by which we do it and how we engage people that have built their lifestyles and livelihoods in certain ways of how the economy operates, if you're going to change how that operates, well, you better be involving people in it. And there's a sense of incremental progress, while at the same time there's a balance with going fast enough that we meet the challenges we have. Is that enough of a starting point for you? Cool. I think, yeah, such an important question. Other questions that I can offer to deflect back to you? And I understand there's a chance for more conversation after this. I was speaking with Evan. There's a small group of students that are going to be meeting up for a conversation. And for those, I think there's some extra spots if others want to join for that conversation. I just feel so strongly that me at the front of this room is not going to give you the answers to some of these big things. But maybe we can get into a bit of it more afterwards. And if you want to join for that, you can talk to Evan. Were there other questions? And maybe if it's okay with you, John, we can open up students, great, and then also faculty are welcome to join too.
So I'm curious as to your thoughts on how big this organization can be, just in terms of sustainability, is often paired with staying local. So obviously this would be a good thing to have a lot of businesses involved in, but do you think that there comes a point when it needs to be limited, or I guess I don't really understand well enough how it works.
Yeah, I think that's so important. So the broad thinking to start the question is that, first of all, where we're seeing progress on the climate crisis is primarily at the community level, with exceptions. And my province is an example where we've moved away from coal altogether. But generally speaking, it's at the community level where meaningful progress is getting made. So I totally hear your point. And that thinking is actually a lot of what inspired this approach to sharing the model. Let me just pause and tell you a bit more about this and see how you feel about it. So the idea is that we can't just take what happened in Waterloo region and cookie cutter it and start this major empire organization that will then come to each community and say, okay, Middlebury, how do you want to, here's your answer. Off we go. Instead, what we've said is, you know what? there's these 4 main approaches here that we think were pretty critical to the success. An example being social enterprise. Pretty critical that the organization doesn't rely on grants, that it charges fees of some kind. Pretty critical that target setting is a core part of it. And so we call these kind of the rules of the game. Are we playing the same game? And then each of these organizations is a separate entity. In some cases that started up to be a part of this. In some cases existed already. Enviro Center is based out of Ottawa. They've been in place for 15 plus years. They were looking to engage the business community in a meaningful way. Now by partnering with Collab, they have access to coaching and support from us, having done it already. They're the face in Ottawa. They're going to have a lot of these same conversations. In fact, we have a milestone process to the earlier question that was asked. That process is going to help them work with the business community in Ottawa to set targets that make sense for them. And the reality is that the economy in Niagara and Middlebury and Ottawa and Waterloo region, very different. And so not only do we need to actually localize for each community, we also kind of want new innovations. We've only been at this for 6 years. I bet there are some better ways to do any number of different aspects of this work, whether it relates to how you deliver the service, to how you communicate it, to the fees you charge. And so if you let others innovate and you share with them what's worked so far, maybe they'll then share that back. And maybe collectively the network is then stronger. So my sense is, or my opinion at least, on how to scale social innovation is you rely on local relationships, local autonomy, and be very careful of what you control. In our case, it's simply these 4 things. And outside of these 4 areas of control, we then let these local organizations lead it. And the funny part for me is I just made this switch in the past 6 months. I just moved from an organization of 75, so 8 staff and dozens of volunteers, to an organization of 2. And so while we're scaling up geographically, the size of the team that's actually behind it is way smaller. And I think there's a critical, I hope that will be a big part of where we might have some success, is by keeping the ownership in each community and being really careful about what we choose to control. Yes, in the back. And then over here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, certainly. We've had a few good conversations with 3 different organizations so far. What we've started to learn from others that have scaled models of various social innovations is how important it is to show geographic scale first. So one of our first questions is, will this work across Ontario? Shorter way of saying it, was this a crazy Waterloo region thing? Was there certain reasons why it worked in this time and place? And my hope is over the next 3 years, we will be in the midst of proving out that 1, this model works any number of different places, and 2, having a network will actually help that. If we can show this, and if we prove that question out, then we would be very interested in saying where else could this work. And I can say right from the Ashoka interviews from the very beginning, one of the first questions I got was, Mike, do you think this could work in Helsinki? And sure. Go back to that same question again, localize it for that community. And I guess the seed to go back is, well, hey, if you know of a group in the States that you think we should be in touch with, I'm always open to a conversation. There's a question here, and then we'll go to the back. Go ahead. Oh, wait, there's a microphone to pass over in logistics. Yeah.
So I was just wondering what sort of, how you kind of presented this program to the first businesses, because it seems like there's kind of a little bit of a hurdle in this model where it probably wouldn't be financially beneficial for them to be in the program at the beginning until you get to the point where with the insurance companies you were saying it's actually negative to not be in the program. But yeah, what is kind of the incentive to get people involved in the first place?
Great question. I think the underpinnings behind it have to do with the product adoption curve or technology adoption curve. Are you guys familiar with this? It's a bell curve. And on the one side, you have innovators and early adopters, and then you move to the early majority. In between there is what's called a chasm. It's a really big jump over. And as you move towards, well, you move from the 3% that are innovators to the 30% that are early majority, and then late majority, and then a laggard at the very end, and it gets fell, right? And I think what was important in Water the Region, we're encouraging other communities, is to understand your audience well, because the reasons why an innovator will join will be very different from that laggard, for example. And so yes, you're absolutely right. A very tangible example, for the first 3 that joined the network, there wasn't much of a network to get access to, right? So why did they join? Well, I bet it was a mix of a value connection. Maybe there was a kind of a personal connection through the university. Maybe they saw the long-term potential and they wanted to be a part of something bigger than themselves. But the business reason for them, for those innovators early on, was much more limited than for that early majority. And then that early majority for them might be more about that business case I was speaking to earlier, versus then the laggards are thinking about, well, hey, if everyone else has already done it, I got to catch up. And that story we're seeing played in a few different sectors. So there's a lot of good research on this. I'm by no means an expert, but my sense is if you want to understand that better, and I think you can apply it, this is not just for us, this is for any new innovation you're looking to bring to any group, you likely would want to think about that same adoption curve, who is in those different segments, and how you speak or tailor your message, and who you segment, who you spend your time reaching out to based on that. And I can tell you that in the business plans we're having each of these communities put together, there's a section of the plan for that. We're having them ask those questions so that they can work through that.
Thanks.
Sure. Just in the back, and I'll just leave it to others to cut me off when you feel.
Thank you. The quotes that you included from Foster Wallace and from Rilke, to me those describe sort of uncomfortable opportunities. So moments for individuals when they confronted who they were, and then this created an opportunity for fundamental change. So I'm wondering, in your experiences working with different organizations in Waterloo, if you could describe a moment, a sort of an uncomfortable moment in which an organization asked real questions about who they were and fundamentally changed. So individuals within the organization fundamentally decided to do something very different, as opposed to maybe labeling as green things that they were already doing.
That's a great question. Well, first, you have to be very careful differentiating between an individual value shift versus an organization-wide value shift. And I think you're bang on to that those are moments, and I can reflect on my own individual moment of my changes. But I'm not sure that in an organization it happens in that same way. I think it's more gradual with a number of people that are involved. And so I'm not sure there is that moment. I have seen organizations on a whole, a manufacturer I'm thinking of that bends and cuts steel, where their CEO had a different way of thinking over the first several years. And then you saw that influence, then my conversations with that person's staff were different. And then the second part, to be careful in my answer, is how removed I was from the program itself. And so if I wasn't clear enough, I should share, there's program staff in Waterloo Region that work with the companies. And so I didn't actually get the benefit of having a lot of the conversations with the businesses in the midst of, say, a green team meeting, where they'd be having big conversations about what we're going to take on and what we're not. And where I was involved is when we read the questionnaires at the end of the year, or kind of these ad hoc conversations afterwards. So the summary is, yes, I think individually a lot of that took place. I wasn't as close to it. And for an organization, there are a number of those moments over the course of several years that then leads to a sway in how that organization thinks. I bet on this campus and some of the big conversations you're having, you can probably relate to that kind of bigger shift. Certainly if you're available afterwards, we should have a longer conversation.
I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative just with maybe a final comment. What I love about your own personal narrative is what it says about what we do, higher ed. And we're in the middle of a review of our ES program. And you know, one way to talk about our challenge in the liberal arts is, you know, text-based, book-based, and so forth, fairly traditional. to be contrasted with a hands-on kind of experiential learning. And what you show is that that's a rich continuum. Have the great books front and center, but then allow the student, as your professor did, to have that moment where they need to search and to make sure that we have the flexibility to let that happen. What you did, nobody had ever done before. But then at the core of it is what you've just described in the process of responding with CAD and brought out so well is who the person is becoming. And I thought that part of your narrative was beautiful. And again, for the many seniors in this room who will soon be graduates of Middlebury, in addition to paying a lot into their annual fund, they will be doing a lot of searching. And you really captured how that lasts forever. And I think it, as an educator, there's a lot we need to do right. But in some ways, it's to listen to each individual with whom we're lucky enough to work and let things happen. Don't partition ourselves into a form of education, but allow it to develop around each human being, if that makes any sense.
Can I comment on that, John? Particularly for the faculty that are here, I just could not agree more that my undergraduate education, on the business side in particular, gave me a language to speak to the business community with. And that there was professors and administration that then strongly supported this experiential learning outside the classroom and saw the value of that and gave me course credit for it alongside in the classroom. That was critical to any measure of success that I had early on. That those profs were then the folks that were on my board, funders, in some cases volunteers, and in some cases just moral support in this journey of learning outside the classroom that was grounded in what I'd learned on campus. And in fact, where I spend some of my time now is helping at Laurier to encourage more of those kinds of opportunities for students and more institutional place and infrastructure for students to get access to meaningful experiential learning to complement everything you get in the classroom. And if Laurier can make progress on that, my hope is that they will see more and more students kind of thinking outside the box and doing things in different ways.
The last thing that I will note is based on a conversation that Pete and Mike had is that I know this to be true. He'll be here tonight, and it sounds like he may be a bit of a fan of a sport that is well loved in his home country. And there happens to be a great place in town that probably around 7:30 will have a certain hockey game on. So that might be another place that we could all meet up later tonight. That place is called Two Brothers. So on that community-oriented note, Michael, this was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.